There's a lot to get into with him, primarily this Al Jazeera stuff. Mike, I can tell from your posts on Twitter, from everything going on, that you are pretty fired up about the NFL's letter saying that if James Harrison, Clay Matthews, Julius Peppers, and Mike Neal do not interview with the league by August 25th, they're going to be suspended. And I can sense that you're none too pleased.
Well, and here's what bothers me, and this gets back to last year when fans of teams other than the Patriots were saying, we don't care about Deflategate, why should we care about Deflategate? And my response always was, because your team could be the next to find itself on the wrong side of a situation like this. And what the league is doing, it's taking the power that it has obtained through the Tom Brady case, the power to compel guys to participate in investigations, the power to suspend guys who either don't cooperate or who provide false information or incomplete information. Now the NFL has the power to suspend those players, even though that's something the NFL has never otherwise bargained for. And it gets removed from the PED policy. There's nothing in the PED policy that requires these guys to come in and give evidence against themselves. The way the PED policy is written, if the NFL has evidence other than a positive test or a violation of the law that a guy's committed a PED violation, you take action, and then if the player chooses to fight it, he files an appeal, and then he tells his story. The player doesn't have to be a source of the information that is used against him in those investigations. That's gotten turned on its head because the NFL now believes under Article 46, conduct detrimental to the game, the Tom Brady policy, that it can go around the PED policy and say, you're compelled to come in and give an interview, and if you don't, we're going to suspend you for refusing to do so. That's the problem here. And now the question is, with the battle line drawn, will the NFLPA find a way to fight? Will they find a way to let these guys submit? And will the players choose to ignore the recommendation of the NFLPA and say, hey, I got nothing to hide. I'm going in for this interview. I'm not going to get suspended because the union is telling me not to be interviewed.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different things here, Mike. I guess the first thing I would say is, let's say something happened down in West Virginia over the weekend. Who knows? And you may or may not have been involved. And your boss at NBC sends you an email and says, hey, Mike, I've seen some reports that something might have happened. Give me a buzz when you get a chance. Wouldn't you call him? I mean, wouldn't you? Yeah, if your boss wanted to talk to you,
I don't have a union contract. I don't have a specific set of rules that has been constructed and bargained for at a bargaining table over the course of decades that outlines what powers the employer does and doesn't have when it comes to investigating allegations of wrongdoing. And before Tom Brady, there had been no one suspended for failing to cooperate or obstructing a league investigation. That was the upshot of the Saints Bounty case when the commissioner handed off the appeals process to Paul Tagliabue. Hey, no one's ever been suspended for this before. And Brett Favre, when he lied to the NFL as part of that investigation over the whole texting thing from 6 years ago, he was just fined $50,000. They didn't take any action against him. So the NFL has conjured, through the court system, the power now to tell these guys, you must come in and you must give interviews. And the NFLPA's position is, I assume the position is, you don't have that right because you haven't bargained for that right at the table. It's very different when a union is involved.
So then what we're really talking about here is the threshold and what should constitute a player having to be interviewed because it is credible evidence and what isn't, right? I mean, isn't that the standard? Well, who decides what's credible evidence and what's not, Mike?
Well, and that's where this got off the rails early on because the NFLPA took the position that, hey, we'll let these guys interview if you show us credible evidence of a PED violation. And the NFL didn't want to put its cards on the table because it would rather interview these guys cold because the NFL thinks we're more likely to get the truth if these guys don't know what evidence we have. What the NFLPA, I believe, should have said is, hey, guys, there is nothing in this PED policy that compels players to be part of the credible evidence that you develop. You have to get the credible evidence somewhere else. And if you think it's credible, then go ahead and impose discipline. And in a case like this, it's a 6-game suspension. Go ahead and impose it. We have appeal rights through neutral arbitration now. This gets overlooked. PED policy, substance abuse policy, they now have neutral arbitration. But now, by saying, well, these guys have an obligation to come in and give us this information, or else the or else goes under Article 46, and that's ultimately resolved on appeal by the commissioner. And I think by now we know what the commissioner's position will be if and when it's appealed to him that these players should not be suspended for refusing to cooperate with the investigation.
That they should not be?
No, he will find that they should be suspended. I'm saying on appeal, the question is they shouldn't be. The commissioner's not going to overturn the finding that they should be suspended.
So is this really just about the NFL flexing its muscles because it feels like it, or because it feels like it's entitled to it?
It's not flexing the muscles because it feels like it. This is the broader power play between the NFL and the NFL Players Association. How much power does the NFL have over all players? And, inevitably, these two sides are going to be back at the bargaining table. The more power the NFL has, if the NFLPA wants to change the status quo, that's more the NFLPA has to give up. And we don't know how this all plays itself out. When it's time to negotiate a CBA, you got a bunch of issues that one side wants, you got a bunch of issues the other side wants, but if you can demonstrate to the union, hey, we got a lot of power here. If you don't like this this power that we have, well, we got a lot of it. So you got to give us a lot of stuff for us to give up this power that we have. That's what this is all about. It's about the league's power over the players, and they acquired extra power through the Tom Brady litigation, and they're going to use it now. And they're going to show the union, hey, you better be ready to give us something. You better be ready to play 17 or 18 regular season games or whatever else the NFL wants if the union wants some of that power back.
So what do you think ends up happening here?
Well, I'm trying. The NFLPA isn't saying anything yet because they don't know what they're going to do. I'm going to write something at PFT outlining the options, but I think there's going to be a lot of pressure from the players involved on the union to find a way to let these guys be interviewed because they don't want to be suspended indefinitely before there's even a resolution as to whether or not they use PEDs.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm one of the players, Mike, and I didn't do anything wrong, I understand what the NFLPA is trying to do, but I got to do what's best for me.
Who's going to pay me while I'm suspended indefinitely because we are trying to set a good precedent for all players? Screw all players. I'm the one that's losing my money here. So unless the NFLPA is going to pay me what I would have made while I'm suspended for following what the NFLPA tells me to do, I'm not even going to consider it. And even then, we've seen this time and again. Ross, these guys want to play football. You can tell a guy I'm going to pay you your salary anyway. You can just stay home. 99% of America would love to have a paid vacation. Football players want to play football. So even if you are finding a way to pay these guys while they're off, they still want to play. And I think what's going to happen here is that the NFLPA is going to try to find a way to take this thing to court quickly and get a resolution quickly before August 25. I think that's the only thing they can do. Before August 25, try to get a ruling that the that the NFL can't do what the NFL wants to do. I think that's the only way out of this. Otherwise, you just have to show up for the interviews.
Mike, Cam Newton made some interesting comments to GQ magazine. He's on the cover this month, and he was asked about the criticism he receives, and he said he does not think it's racism, doesn't think that's why he gets the criticism that he gets. And what's amazing to me, Mike, is I've seen multiple people come out and say, well, that's Cam Newton harnessing his inner Michael Jordan, if you will, and saying it's not racism because sort of he wants to be more marketable, the whole Republicans buy sneakers too thing. It's unbelievable to me, Mike, that if a guy says he doesn't think it's racism, there are people that are going to call him out and say, how can you say that? It is racism. Like we were saying earlier on the show, these guys just can't win.
Well, but he said back before the Super Bowl, he didn't say it directly that it's racism, but he said people haven't seen an African-American quarterback that can do the things I do, and there was that hint of racism that he raised then. I think one of the fundamental realities is people are always going to hate successful quarterbacks because successful quarterbacks on successful teams beat other teams, and the fans of those other teams ultimately hate Cam Newton, Tom Brady, Russell Wilson, Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers because they're the quarterback of the team that is beating the crap out of the team I like on a regular basis. So some of it is natural. Some of it goes with the territory. Now, with Cam Newton, if any of that is coming from his fan base, if there are criticisms directed at him that may not be directed at white quarterbacks, then you do have kind of a gray area here. but he did inject the racial angle into it back in January, and I don't know what's happened in the last 7 or 8 months to make him view it differently, but there's definitely been a change in his attitude toward where that criticism comes from.
Do you think, Mike, like for the Super Bowl thing, do you think that Cam Newton got increased criticism because of the color of his skin? Because I personally think that if anybody else did it, think about how much criticism a guy like Jay Cutler gets. If Jay Cutler or somebody like that had done that, I think the reaction would have been exactly the same.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's how the person behaves, not what the person looks like. And I didn't have a problem with it. I'd much rather a guy be upset and sullen and sulking after a Super Bowl loss than out there trading jerseys and yucking it up and having a good time. I mean, fans are upset when their team loses a big game, and I think fans should like it when the key players on that team are just as upset as the fans are.
So we know that the results out of preseason, Mike, don't mean that much. We get that. But what did matter to you in week one? What did you see that you think really will make a difference or does matter as far as the regular season is concerned?
Well, I think the key thing in preseason is emerging with the healthiest team possible, and I see a Robert Griffin III in Cleveland who is no different than he was in Washington, and who either doesn't understand the connection between getting hit and getting hurt, and it's basic math. It's the number of times you get hit and the number of times you get hurt. The more times you get hit, you're going to get hurt, and I just don't think he's capable of, on one hand, trying to play football at a high level, and on the other hand, consciously trying to avoid the number of times or minimize the number of times he's hit. And I think what we saw in limited duty on Friday tells me that it's just a matter of time before Josh McCown or Cody Kessler is playing quarterback for the Browns, not because Griffin struggles, but because it's inevitable he's going to get hurt again.
Mike, always appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
All right, see you guys.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.